Welcome to What's the Big Idea? I'm your host, Dan Carney. I'm recording this on Saturday, March 6th, and the Senate has just approved the Biden administration's $1.9 trillion COVID relief package. While understanding this kind of government stimulus is certainly the thing of economic classes, there's a lot in there that directly connects to understanding personal finance. Let's just take the stimulus checks that a large number of American families will be receiving. I actually didn't receive the second stimulus check, just like many Americans didn't, because the IRS became so bogged down with the start of tax season that many people just didn't get it. And now we have to fill out an additional form with our tax returns to receive it. I've also noticed in my research that there are a lot of scam websites looking to take advantage of people who did not receive the second stimulus check. Understanding my taxes, understanding how to advocate for myself when it comes to things like a government stimulus check, and understanding where not to look, well, that's all a matter of personal finance literacy. And that's the topic of today's show. I've long been intrigued by the idea of personal finance literacy and the fact that, as far as I can tell, most schools don't seriously teach it. And I've always thought of that as an oversight. In researching this show, though, I came across a lot of criticism of personal finance education, and the gist of that criticism is simply, it doesn't work. For example, Timothy Ogden from the Financial Access Initiative wrote an editorial in the Washington Post in 2019, arguing that the problem with personal finance education is that while it may increase student knowledge, it does not impact their actions. In other words, people are not more likely to make better decisions later on because they had personal finance classes in school. Ogden blames the economic landscape that we're living in, rising college prices, home prices, healthcare prices, and that this reality is not reflected in personal finance ed. On the other hand, there are those that make the case that meta-studies of financial education are simply lumping in anything that constitutes the transmission of information about personal finance into their studies, including lots of really bad examples. Bill Hensley, the president for the National Endowment for Financial Education, claims that without a minimum standard of what constitutes personal finance education, research is bound to show poor results. Which brings me to Next Gen Personal Finance, an organization with a large and frequently updated catalog of resources for teaching personal finance and training teachers of personal finance. As you'll hear in my interview with Yanely Espinal, the director of educational outreach there, as well as a frequent personal finance YouTuber and podcaster, the organization is incredibly nimble, constantly updating its curriculum to meet the financial questions of the moment. I've linked NextGen in the show notes, and if you're a teacher of personal finance, or you know someone who is, or someone who's looking for a fresh approach, then I highly recommend NextGen. My conversation with Yanely was really illuminating and student-centered. I began by asking her to define financial literacy.
I think financial literacy is being able to make strong financial decisions. So it's really about money-making choices or choices around what you're doing with money. And then also understanding how the system of money works. It's really a complicated system in a lot of ways. And if you're not learning about it in school and breaking that down into digestible chunks, it's going to be really tough because you're going to end up learning about it through the school of hard knocks.
And what is the school of hard knocks when it comes to personal finance?
It's the way most people, you and I likely probably learned it this way. So just going with the flow, making decisions day to day that you think make the most sense based on the little bit of knowledge that you do have around money and finances, and then making a lot of mistakes, right? And the sad thing about learning that way is that mistakes when it comes to money can be very, very costly. And so it's a very expensive way to learn, which is really a bummer for a lot of people who are specifically in low income communities or from low income families, because you already have a limited amount of access to money, and then paying really costly fees to learn about the best ways to handle money is really just not optimal, and it's not just at the end of the day. So I think as much as we can eliminate people having to go out there and kind of experiment and make mistakes to learn, if we can eliminate that by teaching them financial literacy formally, then we're going to be doing a huge service to our country.
Do schools teach financial literacy by and large? Is this something that you've seen in your work as a priority or even a secondary priority in schools?
I wish I could say yes, but sadly, no. It's largely not prioritized. What we see happening right now, there's a conversation that's happening, which is really kind of confusing and muddling the terminology, the language, which confuses people. So to be clear, there is a kind of a base camp of people who are in support of a mandate. A mandate means that you have a full semester of personal finance that's required through some sort of legislation, whether that's at the state level, the federal level, whether it's by your school board. But basically, the mandate would mean that your students cannot graduate without having had that full semester course. Full semester in most cases is 18 weeks of instructional time. Now, there's this other base camp of people that go, well, that's a lot. We don't have the time and space for that. We don't have the training. We don't have the materials. Instead, we're going to do what's called embedding. So we're going to embed personal finance throughout the other core subjects in little bits and pieces here and there. And so, by the time they graduate, they'll have learned a bit of financial literacy throughout their math classes, maybe their social sciences, maybe in ELA. And so they'll have a little bit of knowledge because of that, in the embedded coursework that relates to personal finance. So what we see now, the mandated side of it, 6 states require a full semester of personal finance before high school graduation at the high school level. And in terms of embedding, there's 21, I think 22 actually as of 2021, 22 states that embed financial literacy into other courses for, significantly less than 18 weeks worth of instructional time.
Is one more effective?
The interesting thing is the research that exists right now to talk about whether financial literacy works or not, there is mixed research, right? And so there's people that say, oh, absolutely it works. There's so many outcomes that are more positive because of this type of education. And then there's this other side of the research that shows that it's not working and it's not changing people's behaviors. But in either case, when you look at the type of financial education that is being studied, it's by and large embedded financial education, because for the simple fact that it's not being required. Like, it has never been a mandate at the federal level that every single state has to teach it the way that we prioritize math and science and reading. So because of that, it's just by default, when you study financial education and the impacts of it, you're studying embedded financial education and the impacts of it. So if the research is saying it's not really working, it's because what we've done so far hasn't been working. Embedding isn't really a great way to teach it because it doesn't have its own spotlight. It doesn't have its own time to shine for students to really dig into nothing but, money decisions and, and real life situations where they'll have to make money decisions. So it's interesting. I think that's a great question. I would argue that it doesn't really work to embed it. It needs its own semester's worth of instructional time so that it can really be taught in a rigorous way, so that it can be taught strategically, and so that it can be aligned to standards and have outcomes driven, goals at the onset, and so that teachers can have an entire scope and sequence with everything that teachers are using to teach every other subject. It really does deserve all of that in its own right.
That's interesting that you bring that up about the research, because just in getting ready for this conversation, I found so many different perspectives on the effectiveness. Critics, as you point out, they say that it doesn't work. It doesn't change behavior. In fact, as one Timothy Ogden, writing in the Washington Post a couple of years ago, said that the fact that giving people information does not itself change how they act, and that personal finance doesn't fail in terms of knowledge; it fails in terms of creating positive action later. Do you think there's anything to that, though, that if we teach personal finance to, say, a middle schooler or an early high schooler, that by the time they get to making big financial decisions, they have sort of lost the thread, so to speak, on that financial literacy that they learned?
Yeah, I mean, I think I am familiar with that piece, and I think that there's 2 or 3 things in that piece that I was like, oh, I really, really agree with that. And then in large part, I really disagreed with most of the argument that Timothy made, because the core of his argument in that piece is that you're spending money to buy curriculum, to essentially roll out a financial literacy program, that is and especially given the fact that it doesn't work, that it's not a smart financial decision. And the sad thing is, like, well, that's true. It rolling out expensive curriculum, pulling out like all the stuff that costs a lot of money, it doesn't make sense. Education, the budgets are tight across so many different states, and especially in public schools. So I tend to agree that we shouldn't be spending money on these programs. And that's why, where I work at NGPF, at Next Gen Personal Finance, everything is free. So this argument that is the core of the argument that he makes is that we shouldn't be wasting money on this. And I agree, we shouldn't, but it should still be part of the core of the work that we're doing in schools. And we have so many free financial literacy programs that exist. Ours is one of the key ones, NGPF, but there's others as well, where a teacher can go onto our website and get the entire curriculum, get, everything from saving, checking, budgeting, insurance, taxes, investing in the stock market, credit cards, and understanding paying for college and buying a car, entrepreneurship. So many lessons that will take you 18 weeks, right? Or more, depending on how much instructional time you have, without having to pay a dime out of the teacher's pocket, out of the school budget, out of the principal's budget. Nobody has to spend any money. It's all available online for free. The lessons, the activities, the games, the exams, the quizzes. The fact that the argument is, hey, this shouldn't be where the dollars are going, I tend to agree with that. And we don't need to spend any money on it. But the part of the argument really is thinking about what the research shows. And to your point is like, hey, if giving people information doesn't change their decisions, then are students going to be able to even remember the information? We can't make it about information. We have to make it about decisions. And the sad thing that the article that you referred to, it sort of assumes that students don't have important money decisions to make. And that's not true. Maybe certain communities might not have decisions that students, that children are making, but the reality is a lot of kids are involved in the financial decision making, are aware that there's a grocery budget, that when you go to a restaurant that you have to find out the tip. There's lots of ways to engage students in decisions that they're either observing around them that are being made every day, or that they themselves are making, right? How much do I have to save up if I want to buy, my best friend a present? Or if I'm 16 and I want to get my first car, where should I be, putting my savings? Should I be putting it in a traditional savings account and a certificate of deposit? Should I be putting it in an online savings account where I get higher interest? What is the difference between those savings accounts? If you're 16 years old, that matters a lot. Buying your first car is a huge decision, and it's a big deal to you when you're a teenager. So for the argument to be like, oh, but they're not making important financial decisions, and by the time they go to make these decisions, yes, they are. They're making important decisions right now, and especially paying for college. Paying for college is a huge decision that a lot of college juniors and seniors, or high school juniors and seniors, are navigating. And that is a core component of a personal finance class, understanding how you compare interest rates on loans, like student loans, private loans versus federal loans, understanding unsubsidized versus subsidized. Where else are we going to put that if not in a personal financial literacy class?
No, I think that's a really good point, and I don't want to make this conversation too much about Ogden's article, but he one criticism he lays is that financial literacy education doesn't match the realities of the economic landscape in America today. But you're making, I think, a really good counter argument that actually students, especially students that maybe are not from such affluent communities, they're already making tough financial decisions, and this type of education can really help them in the here and now. But let's actually move to the work of NGPF. As you mentioned, it's all free. Spent a lot of time going through your units, your lessons. You've got videos. There's so much on there. How did NGPF start, and what's the mission? It's free, so how does NGPF work?
Yeah, I get it. Every time. So we do a lot of teacher training, and every time we present the information, we're like, okay, it's all free for you guys. And teachers are like, excuse what? What do you mean it's free? What's the catch, right? That doesn't feel right when someone says it's free. So NGPF is about 6 years old, so we're still pretty brand new in the space of financial education. We're a nonprofit organization, which is why everything is free. And it was created by our co-founders, Tim Renzetta and Jessica Eldridge Winkler. And so essentially, Jessica was a former classroom teacher and principal. Eventually, she was the youngest principal in the New York City public school system, actually, before moving over to the NGPF team. And what her role really was thinking about how does a school function, specifically in an urban environment. She taught in Brooklyn, New York, which is where I was born and raised. So obviously, inner city environment, a lot of low income families and students. And so that really opened her eyes to how much the families need financial literacy. And then the experience that Tim brings is he, as the other co-founder, he's a kind of serial entrepreneur. He goes from project to project, and he's really passionate about entrepreneurship. And he had a lot of success, I guess, in his previous life as an entrepreneur. In this new life, he's really just focused on NGPF, which has been awesome to see him be so involved in the organization. But he, with a lot of the success that he had as an entrepreneur in his previous life, he decided he wanted to create an endowment fund. So he put aside $30 million to sit in an endowment fund that would directly support the work of NGPF, the organization. So everything that Next Gen Personal Finance creates, does, the work that we do is always going to be free. It's now free. It always will be, because we are funded through an internal endowment fund. So the beauty of that is, like, we don't have to worry about fundraising, grant writing. We don't have to go, trying to find investment banks or banks to partner with to see if they'll fund the work and sponsor us. Like, it's a beautiful thing to not have to worry about that, and to just be able to work on creating curriculum, creating lessons, activities, games that we know are engaging, are relevant right now. Like your point was, like, yeah, he makes this point that in the article, that like personal finance education doesn't match the current environment. Well, ours does. We have lessons about Venmo versus Cash App. We have lessons about online banking, mobile banking, so kids can actually go onto a simulation and see what it's like to set up an online payment, to pay Netflix, to pay from your checking account, right? Like, the types of things that are happening right now in the 21st century have to be taught in the classroom. So we have a TurboTax simulation where they can practice filing taxes, which a lot of high school students actually do. They work over the summer, they work after school, they get paid internships, and they a lot of times don't realize that it might be beneficial to them to file taxes and get an income tax refund check with no impact on their parents if they do claim them as dependents. But I think that's a myth that a lot of students think, oh, I can't file my taxes because my parents claim me as dependent. We want to dispel those myths and empower students to understand that they have decisions to make with their own income. Investing through investing apps right now, robo-advising, micro-investing apps and platforms are huge. We have to be teaching students about these apps in the classroom. So for him to say that education doesn't match what's happening, I disagree. I think we are doing that, and kids want to know about the apps. They want to know about Robinhood. They want to know about Acorns. They want to know about Wealthfront and Betterment. They want to know about what's happening with GameStop. And for us to withhold that information from them, it's just not right? Because they're seeing it on social media, they're seeing it in the news. So why not bring it into the classroom and engage them and activate their knowledge about this, so that they can get excited about participating in conversations about money and how it works in their lives. Honestly, it is their lives, but also in their families' lives as well.
Yeah, I appreciate the nimbleness of your organization responding to current financial questions and situations. As I go through your curriculum, I actually find myself pausing to sort of educate myself. I think a lot of adults could probably stand to go through a lot of that. I also, I have to say, as a teacher, I appreciate, as a little side note here, I appreciate that all your documents are Google Docs, and they can be copied and customized. It's really accessible. Can you talk about maybe some of the resources that you think may highlight a resource or a unit, or something that you think has been used to great success by teachers, or feedback that you've heard?
Absolutely. I think that the number one unit in our curriculum that has been very impactful for students. And there's so many, so it's hard to like just pick one. But I think that the really, really big one is paying for college. We have a game called Payback, and a lot of students actually choose not to go to college, and it's becoming more and more common for students to be looking for alternatives to college right now. So that unit, it has been awesome in showing students that are interested in college, and also giving resources to students that are considering but aren't really sure what their options might be. And then you can couple that, as a teacher, you can couple paying for college with another unit that we offer, which is a mini unit. So it's sort of like a separate, it doesn't have as many resources, but it's a mini unit that you can use to couple it with paying for college, in case there's students that are like, well, I've already decided I'm not going to college. So if you're going to teach paying for college, I'm just going to check out and go on Snapchat in the back of the class. Like, we don't want that to happen. So what we've done is created alternatives to four-year college. So that unit in and of itself focuses on alternatives. So you don't have to just think paying for college as your class is covering that's all you're talking about. You can actually look at what are alternatives if you choose not to do college. Is there, a trade school you might want to go to, a certificate program? Would you like to join the military? Do you want to go directly into the workforce? And if so, what does that entail? Like all of these other decisions that you have to be making when you're 18 years old, 17 years old, right? And so we just want to make sure that we're building a curriculum that is really fair to every student. It's like every single kid is got to be seen and felt like this curriculum is representing something that is real for them, that it's interesting for them, decisions that they're actually making. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that that's the core part of the units. Is every single unit is really trying to make sure that it's addressing current student issues and making it relevant to them right now as a teenager. How does this affect you? And that, because I think that's the big thing, is if it doesn't feel relevant to them, they're just going to check out. So if you're talking about college and I don't want to go to college, hey, present me with alternatives to four-year college unit, and we'll be talking about all these things at the same time. That, it's brilliant. So it gives teachers a lot of variety, resources. And I think the thing that I'll mention, I mean, this is kind of off topic, but I think the important piece to talk about is that there's the research shows that it hasn't worked. And I think that's really sad when we're going to go and talk about why it's so important. But I think that a lot of the things that we miss in discussing financial education is the teachers teaching it. We're looking at the outcomes of the students, but if a teacher is not prepared to teach a subject well, right, then of course the outcomes of the students are gonna suffer. And I think that when we think about how personal finance isn't being taught in schools, that means that the core of teachers right now that are tasked with teaching it, never learned it themselves. So it's really this weird cycle that we're continuing to just perpetuate, where we're going to continue. The next generation isn't going to learn about personal finance. Some of them are going to become teachers, and then some of them might have to teach something that they never learned themselves. It doesn't make sense. So one of the core pieces of our work is teacher training. Personal finance teacher professional development is one of the huge things that we offer. So the free curriculum is one, and then the free teacher training. And it's almost as if you can't offer any kind of curriculum without training, because putting a book in front of a teacher saying, hey, here's your scripted curriculum, here you go, that just gives them the information, the lessons, the script. But what about the confidence that a teacher needs to feel like, not only do I have the information, the lessons, but I feel good about getting in front of my kids and I'm ready to answer questions that they might have. I've got the confidence to speak without, flipping through my script and trying to make sure I remember what I'm saying, if I'm saying it right. So it's got to be competence. So by training them and upskilling them with the content knowledge that they never got in school, but also confidence, making sure that they feel more confident. I think there's new research now that shows that teachers are so much more confident to teach this now more than ever. And I would argue that that's in large part because of some of the work that we're doing, which is exciting to see that it's actually paying off.
I sense a lot of listeners nodding when you talk about that. It's that merging of teacher confidence, teacher passion, and teacher competence. That training, absolutely. What do you hear from teachers during these PD sessions? What are they telling you about their views of your curriculums? What questions do they have? What do you hear from teachers?
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing that we hear, which is amazing, I don't know that I've ever worked somewhere where I heard this so much every day, all day, but they say thank you. Thank you so much. Like, we are so grateful. Like, we wish that we had this for every other subject we teach. We wish we had comprehensive, curated resources, 21st century relevant, online, game-based, like customizable. Like, there's so much ownership that, and like trust, that we just throw it on teachers and say, hey, we're going to give you what you need, but you can change it, you can customize, you can edit. Like you said before, everything's in Google Docs. So as long as you go to file, make a copy, and save that document to your own Google Drive, you can customize it, change it in any way you want. Reword the questions, eliminate some things. And I think that's what's so important about the work, is like, when you think about a lot of curriculum development companies, there's this lack of trust, right? In terms of like providing teachers with opportunities to customize, that just doesn't really exist. Most of the time it's copyrighted, it's trademarked, it's a PDF document, you can't edit it, and I remember old school, right? Like, I would go, when I taught elementary school, I would go by the Xerox machine with my worksheet, and I would like put white out on my worksheet, blow on it to dry it, write, change the question, change it, to customize it, and however I thought made sense, wait for that to dry, and then photocopy it, and then assign it to my, make enough copies for my kids. It's like, why do we have to do all this rigmarole kind of craziness just to make changes that we think are best for our students? We know our students best. We're in the class with them all day, every day. So at NGPF, we're like, you know what? that has to be a core part of it. We have to give teachers the right to be able to change it, customize it, to make it, differentiated for their students, more culturally relevant for the specific culture of their student population. Whatever it is that you need to do, we empower you to do it. And we also teach you how. We do these trainings. We're like, okay, this is how you make a copy. This is how you edit it. This is how you save it. This is how you share it with your students. So teachers feel confident. And I think it's a beautiful thing to work somewhere where teachers email you every day saying, thank you so much. Like, this has literally made teaching this class possible, easy, enjoyable. Like, this has really changed the game for me. And it's awesome to hear that. It really is.
It reminds me of a quote I saw from the president of the National Endowment for Financial Education, saying that, he says the majority of what's called financial education is in reality just passing along financial information. And I think that's where, going back to some of the criticisms, if we just kind of lump together everything that's called financial education, it doesn't look good on a whole. But when you start pulling out pieces like NGPF's work, you can see some really special things happening. How about talk to me about the gamification of financial literacy? I think that's something that a lot of teachers would respond to as well. We know that kids love that. They love learning that way. So how does NGPF tackle that?
Yeah, I think so. I think we were doing that in person. And then, of course, now in a COVID world, we've transitioned and pivoted, as they say, to digital gamification as well. We've always had digital games on our site in the arcade on ngpf.org. If you just go to the website and click on arcade, we have all these quizzes, all these games that touch on different topics. Like there's one of my favorites is Shady Sam, which is a very shady loan shark who is trying to get you to give the worst loan terms possible to the client coming into your office. And as the player, the student, you're the intern for this shady dude, for Shady Sam. You're his intern. So you work for him. And so he leaves, he's on vacation, and your job is to see all these customers come in and saying, oh no, for example, like I have a roof that's leaking right now and I need a loan. Can you offer me something? And then the 3 loans pop up and you have to offer them the worst one, the highest interest rate, the most number of payments.
I love that. I love that because, one of the most powerful tools we have with students is the non-example, right? Don't always show them the best, show them the worst and make them really think about it. I love that that's a game that forces them to step into the shoes of the bad guy.
That's right. And that's the power of gamification. When you play games online, you see the types of games that are really popular. You're blowing guns, racing, you're fighting. It's like, hey, listen, at the end of the day, there's some intrigue in doing bad things, right? And so, let's find out what are the bad things going on in the financial space, and how do we tap into that and show and open kids' eyes to say, oh, wow, is that what's happening when I go into a bank or into a place to get a loan? They're offering me really bad terms, and I have the power to negotiate. I have the right to say, is there another loan with a lower interest rate that you could offer me? Like the fact that that's the outcome that they learn from these games is so powerful. And then, so we have these arcade games and quizzes and things. They click around, they get to play the game and make choices. But then the cool part about the gamification that I think was happening even before stuff was happening online with games and computers was this in the classroom game experience. So what we have is a series of activities called move activities. So we're thinking about a classroom where, hey, maybe you have a copy machine at the office, but you might not have one-to-one. Maybe every kid doesn't have a device, right? So how do we still get to play games and have fun learning, even if everybody doesn't have a device? So we created these move activities where all the resources are printable. So you literally just hit file print on the computer, grab those pages, and then either, depending on the game and the structure of the game, there's something for students to do either in groups or independently. So my one of my favorite games is about how the stock market is organized. And so the way that the game works is there's 14 categories, or no, 11 categories. And then these categories represent the sectors of the stock market, all the industries that your company might fit under. So, financial companies, tech companies, right? Consumer goods companies. And so the students first have to just take a look at all of the categories on the wall. And then the next round of the game is for them to correctly define each industry by walking up to the paper on the wall, or maybe it's against the lockers or on a bulletin board. And in groups they would discuss, okay, here's this definition here. Which industry do we think this defines, right? If it says banks, loan companies, okay, clearly that's the financial sector. So they would walk over there and tape up the definition under the financial sector paper. And so after they define all the sectors, the next part, which is the most fun, is they get to walk around with a bunch of strips of paper with the names of companies that are household names. They know more about the stock market than they think. They see Johnson and Johnson, they see CVS, they see Bank of America, they see Amazon, Facebook, and they have to walk up to each industry and go, oh, okay, all right, which sector is this company based on what I know about the company? And if they don't know about the company, they have to research. So it's really just a cool game because it gives students ownership over having to take the learning into their own hands. They can identify what they feel confident about, like, oh, okay, I think I know a little bit about Johnson and Johnson, but I don't know enough about, maybe Amgen or something like that. So their ability to be able to say, I recognize that I don't know much about this, and my job is to go research it and then correctly put it up on the wall. And then you can break the class up into teams, either this half of the class versus that half of the class, and you can race against the clock, or you can race for accuracy. So whoever has the most correct or whoever finished first, right? So there's just so many ways that teachers can turn their classroom into a physical game. And the kids are learning, they're moving. It's so exciting. It's not sitting in my desk hearing, the teacher just talk at me. And that's the goal of our entire curriculum, is to make learning active, engaging, and super fun. At the end of the day, we just want it to be fun.
Prior to COVID, were you able to get into schools and watch your curriculum play out?
Yes, I'm so lucky because in my role, I do educational outreach. So I'm actually, the very first year of my job, I was literally just traveling. I went to like 100+ high schools and shared, different activities. We have that same one that I just described for how the stock market is organized. We have that same one for the taxes at the federal level, and how the budget for how the government spends our tax dollars, how that budget is structured. So this much money is spent on science research, this much money is spent on education, this much money is spent on Social Security and Medicare. And so I actually witnessed a group of kids in the Bronx, okay, like in New York City, where I'm from, to see those kids so engaged. Like the fact that they were running around, oh, no, that's too much. The final round, they actually have to guess what percentage of the budget goes to that specific category. And to see the kids like literally saying to each other, yo, this is crazy. I can't believe the government only spends 2% of the federal budget on scientific research. Like, that is crazy. Like, that shouldn't be happening. We should be putting way more money to researching science and way more money to public education. And like those types of conversations happening in a classroom in the Bronx, is a lot of people out there who wouldn't believe that kids in that type of environment would be engaged. And I highly disagree with them. It's not about the fact that the kids aren't engaged. It's about the fact that the learning and the instruction isn't engaging them. And so how do we create resources that will engage them and will get them excited? Because I've seen it happen. I've seen kids light up talking about taxes, talking about investing in the stock market. So the passion can be passed on from a teacher to a student in any setting, as long as the teacher has the tools and the confidence.
So you went to school with a mix of people from all over the city. Later, you did Teach for America.
I did. That was the first job I did right after college.
What was that like, and how does that influence you today in the work that you do?
It was amazing for me. And I know there's a lot of mixed reviews out there about Teach for America and the impact and the training, and is it effective? And, you have teachers just committing to 2 years and then moving on to law school or to their medical school, whatever. But for me, being a kid from a low income family and having attended Title I funded public schools, which means that like 75% or more of the students in the class or in the school receive a free lunch or reduced lunch. So essentially saying 75% or more of the families that send their kids to this school are low income. And so those were the schools I went to my whole life. So for me to be able to step into those schools again as a teacher, after having spent 20 years in those schools as a kid, was so powerful, because I felt like my story could inspire the kids to say, listen, if I was sitting in that same chair where you're sitting now, and I was able to go off to a really great college on a full scholarship just because I worked my butt off in class, in school. I made sure that I was really doing my best, that if I didn't understand something, that I raise my hand and ask a question and say, I'm sorry, miss, I just don't get that. Can you repeat that part? I don't understand that part. That's where I'm missing the connection between that and this, right? And teaching them to advocate for themselves and not be afraid to ask questions. There's no such thing as a dumb question. And being that voice that tells them that is so important, because I see that a lot of the kids in urban environments don't always have that I guess the word is like the confidence to just be able to raise your hand and ask a question. Like they don't recognize that they don't understand, or they're afraid. Like there's a vulnerability that you need to be able to have when you raise your hand and say, I don't get it, right? Like you have to be vulnerable enough to admit you don't know, you don't get it, or you're confused. And when you grow up in a tough environment, like in New York City, like there's a lot of grit. You have this, there's a culture of like being really gritty, being tough. Like nobody's gonna mess with me on the street, right? And so that doesn't match raising your hand to say, wait, I don't get it. You know, that those are very different personas. You have this one side of you that's like really tough, and then you have this other side of you that's like vulnerable and like, wait, I don't understand, can somebody help me understand this? And it's almost as if there's this conflict to do both. So I think it's a beautiful thing when students get to see somebody like them share the story. Yes, it is okay, this is a safe space. You can be tough in the street and come in here and still raise your hand and say, I don't get it, and that's okay. I did that, you can do it. That's how you progress. So I think, I mean, I enjoyed TFA. It was a tough training, but I loved it. I taught third grade and then fourth grade. And then I taught fourth grade again. And then I transitioned over to the nonprofit sector.
I love that message about being able to come into a classroom and ask questions. That's certainly what personal finance education is all about, because most of us know so little about it. Even as adults, how many of us are afraid to ask questions about personal finance issues that we're struggling with, we don't understand? Well, Yanely, I want to thank you so much for joining me. I just want to get you out of here on this. For a teacher listening who maybe teaches financial education or knows someone who does and is feeling maybe a bit overwhelmed, maybe they're in that boat that you talked about before, they don't have the competence, they don't have the confidence, where would you recommend they start? What's a good step one?
That's a really great point. I think if you're at that point where you're like, I want to do this, or I'm tasked with doing this, and I just don't feel good about it, it can be really, it can be really stressful. And so just, you know, I want to recognize that and acknowledge that, and like that's, and validate that. Like that is a valid feeling. To be stressed, to be frustrated is valid. But I do want to say, like, you know, there's hope. There's so much hope, because you can find resources, you can find free training, you can find a community of teachers that are there to help you. So, and that's why I think the beautiful part of the work that I do is that I get to be part of this community of teachers who are really just trying to make financial education better, whether that's business, entrepreneurship, personal finance, economics, and whatever, you know, course under the financial education umbrella it is. There's this massive group of teachers working really hard to make this instruction the best it can be. So I would say, you know, two to three things you can do. One, if you are a Facebook user, join a Facebook group where there's a lot of other financial educators. We have one at NGPF. It's called FinLit Fanatics. So you can literally just Google FinLit Fanatics and then request to join our group. There's over 5,000 teachers in that group who all teach financial education. So be part of a community. That's going to help you to feel like if you have a question, if you're dealing with a challenge, that you have a group of people ready and willing to help you, to send you resources and links to answer your questions. And so that's a great one right there. The second one is to find sources of inspiration. One of the things for me, like when I'm feeling stuck, sometimes it's not to go read or to go do a module or to go attend a PD. Like some of those things, you need to be in a different place to go and take that action. Sometimes you just need some inspiration. And I think a great source of inspiration, we have a documentary that just came out last year, no, 2019. It's called The Most Important Class You Never Had. And of course, you know, the class I'm talking about is personal finance. So we actually follow and document the stories of 8 educators across the US and lots of different states who are all working to advocate for personal finance education, who are either teaching the course or who are fighting to get an elective or to get it to be required. And the stories from the students and the teachers is just incredible. Like there's one teacher in Utah. Utah is a state that requires a full semester of personal finance in every single high school. I think it was the first state to ever mandate personal finance back in 2008, right after the Great Recession. And the teacher from Utah says, not only is this changing my students' lives, and when they go home, they teach their parents and their families what they learned in my class. So there's a ripple effect. But the teacher herself, she says, I sat down with my husband and we made a budget. And my credit is now excellent. And we refinanced our house for a lower interest rate. And how in the world does this class not deserve a spot in every classroom when it changes not just kids' lives and families' lives, but teachers' lives in that way?
And back to our earlier point, she probably encountered that information at a time when she needed it. She was ready to hear it. And as you said earlier, you know, students are already thinking about finance. It's already relevant in their lives. And how often do you offer a PD for teachers who are interested?
Every single day, Monday through Thursday. So we don't do trainings on Fridays because we want to respect teachers, need to go like enjoy a happy hour somewhere. But Monday through Thursday, every single day, multiple trainings, 1 hour long every day. So you can just go ngpf.org, go to teacher PD, click on online PD, and join literally every hour on the hour. We have trainings.
Okay. Fantastic. From Next Gen Personal Finance, Yanely Espinal, I want to thank you so much for joining me today and sharing all these insights.
My pleasure to be here, Dan. Thank you so much for this great conversation.
Huge thanks to Yanely for that conversation. I'm here on the Next Gen website, and just an incredible bank of resources. I really encourage you to come check this out if you've got any connection to personal finance lit, or if you're a parent who maybe is looking for things for your own child. Just under the curriculum alone, they have units and 9-week courses, semester courses, full year courses, middle school, and a resource center with case studies, current event videos, and as she mentioned, lots of games and interactives. And I guess a lot of this to me just comes down to that age-old question about what do we value in schools, and I wonder if you're sitting there listening. Does your school teach personal finance? Do you personally think that personal finance is something that schools should be teaching? And one convergence between the criticism I mentioned at the beginning, Timothy Ogden's piece that we discussed, and what Next Gen does is there are an agreement that meeting students where they are and targeting the personal finance education is really important. And I think Yanely made a great point that we can't think of students as being removed from the financial realities of this country, and we can meet them where they are. This does not have to be abstract. This can be very meaningful in the here and now for our students. ngpf.org is the website, and I'd love to hear any comments you have. We're on Twitter at BigIdeaEd. Does your school do this? Do you believe in this? If not, why not? Why do you see this as Ogden describes, a waste of time for schools? All right. Thanks so much for listening to What's the Big Idea, and check us out next time.
Hoy es el día que extraño